On March 15, 1871, a 12-year-old German immigrant girl in Milwaukee whispered 3 words in broken English. Herr Kellerman burned children. That single sentence froze an entire community in silence. Because the man she accused, Johann Kellerman, was not only one of the city's most respected bakers, but also dead. He had been pulled from the icy Milwaukee River just 2 weeks earlier. The police called it a tragic accident. But what nobody could explain was how Violet Müller, a poor girl who barely spoke English, knew about a fire in Hamburg, Germany, 7 years earlier, a fire that killed 6 children. A fire Kellerman had secretly confessed to in church. And only 3 people were supposed to know about that confession: God, the priest, and Violet. This is the story of the most dangerous child Milwaukee ever knew. The 3rd Ward 1871. Milwaukee's 3rd Ward in 1871 was alive with the sound and smell of German immigrant life. Cobblestone streets rattled with horse carts. Breweries filled the air with the sweet sting of hops. Bakeries released the warm scent of rye bread. Nearly 3,000 German families had crowded into this neighborhood after fleeing poverty and political unrest in Europe. At the center of their world stood St. Michael's Catholic Church, a limestone fortress with 2 tall spires piercing the sky. Built just 8 years earlier, it was more than a church. It was where babies were baptized, marriages blessed, and sins confessed. But St. Michael's had a problem. Most of the parishioners spoke German. Most of the priests were Irish, and their German was limited to Guten Tag and Auf Wiedersehen. How could souls be forgiven if sins couldn't even be understood? A child translator. That's where the Müller family came in. Heinrich Müller, a barrel maker, and his wife Greta were hardworking but poor. Their daughter Violet, however, was different. With pale blue eyes, braided blonde hair, and a quick mind, she picked up languages like other children collected marbles. After just 2 years in America, she spoke English almost fluently. So in the fall of 1870, Father Patrick O'Brien, the parish priest, made a proposal. Violet would serve as translator inside the confessional. She would sit behind the priest, out of sight, and translate the whispered sins of German parishioners into English. For her family, the 50 cents a week payment was a blessing. Violet agreed. Every Tuesday and Friday evening, she walked to St. Michael's, sat in her small wooden chair, and translated the secret confessions of her neighbors. Father O'Brien warned her, translate faithfully, and then forget everything. The secrets of the confessional belong to God alone. But Violet had a gift, and a curse. She remembered everything. A memory like a trap. At first, the sins were small. Petty thefts. A lie told to an employer. A man who had cursed his wife. Lustful thoughts. Violet listened and translated, while her mind quietly stored away names, dates, and details like a ledger that could never be erased. She never spoke of what she heard, not to her parents, not to friends, not even to herself. But the knowledge grew heavier each week, pressing on her young mind. Then came February 1871, the night the cracks began to show. The first slip. It was a bitter winter evening. Violet had just finished a long session in the confessional and was walking home under the dim glow of the street lamps. Along the way, she met Mrs. Brunhild Zimmermann, the baker's kindly wife, who often slipped Violet cookies from her shop. "Good evening, little Violet," Mrs. Zimmermann called in German. "How is your mother? I have not seen her at the market." "She is sick," Violet replied softly. Mrs. Zimmermann frowned, then promised to send soup. Violet smiled, switching into English, something she often did when emotions ran high. "Not everyone here is so good to children," Violet said, almost without thinking. Some people hurt children and then act like saints." Mrs. Zimmermann tilted her head, confused. She didn't press, but Violet had already revealed too much. The memory of Johann Kellerman's trembling voice in the confessional, confessing to a fire in Hamburg that killed 6 children, burned inside her. A dangerous secret. The next weeks would spiral into chaos. Johann Kellerman, the respected baker, had drowned in the frozen Milwaukee River. Officially, it was called an accident. But after Violet whispered her 3 fateful words, Herr Kellerman burned children, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers and suspicion. How did Violet know? Had the priest told her? Impossible. The seal of confession was sacred. Had she overheard gossip? Unlikely. No one in Milwaukee knew about the Hamburg fire. Only Violet did. And from that moment on, the girl who remembered too much was no longer just a child. She was a danger, to secrets, to reputations, and to the church itself. A fire to hide the truth. Before Violet's story truly began, another fire struck. 3 days after her death, yes, death, for Violet would not live long, the confession ledgers of St. Michael's Church were burned in a mysterious blaze. The official record blamed an accident. But Father O'Brien's hands carried powder burns, marks he explained away as the result of cleaning his hunting rifle. Some secrets, it seemed, were worth burning everything to protect. Fire to be continued. This was just the beginning. Violet Müller was about to uncover sins that reached far deeper than one man's past. And in doing so, she would become the most dangerous child in Milwaukee's history. Right finger if you're ready to follow Violet's chilling journey, don't miss part 2. That's part 1, about 1050 words, rewritten for a YouTube horror history audience, simple, suspenseful, and story-driven. Part 2 The Whisper of Fire. Clapperboard hook. On a freezing February night in 1871, 12-year-old Violet Müller looked straight through Mrs. Zimmerman, her pale blue eyes unfocused, as though she were staring at something far away. Then she whispered, "Some men give bread to orphans on Sunday, but burn down houses with children inside when they live in Germany. God knows everything, even when people think their secrets are safe." The words floated in the cold air like a ghost's breath. And with them, the German community of Milwaukee's 3rd Ward would begin to unravel. The first chill. Mrs. Brunhilde Zimmerman had always thought of Violet as a sweet, polite child. But now, under the glow of the street lamp, she felt something icy creep up her spine. Only one man in their neighborhood gave bread to orphans every Sunday. Only one man matched Violet's strange words. Johann Kellerman, her husband's business partner, her closest family friend. "Violet," Mrs. Zimmerman said carefully, "what do you mean, child? Herr Kellerman is a good man. He would never hurt children." Violet blinked, as though waking from a dream. The distant look vanished from her eyes, replaced by confusion. I don't know why I said that," she stammered. "I should go home. Mama is waiting." She hurried away, leaving Mrs. Zimmerman shivering in the winter air, not from the cold, but from fear. The letter from Hamburg. That night, Mrs. Zimmerman told her husband about Violet's strange words. She expected him to laugh, to dismiss the story as childish nonsense. Instead, Wilhelm Zimmerman grew pale. He stared into the fire for a long time before speaking. 3 months ago, he said. Slowly, Johann received a letter from Hamburg. He was very upset. He asked me to help him write a reply. His German writing is poor, you know. Mrs. Zimmerman leaned closer. What was in the letter? It was from a man named Heinrich Brenner, Wilhelm said. He asked Johann if he knew anything about a fire in Hamburg, back in 1864. A fire that killed children. Brenner believed Johann might know how it started. Mrs. Zimmerman's heart pounded. And what did Johann want you to write back? Wilhelm's eyes darkened. He wanted me to write that he had never lived in Hamburg. That Brenner was mistaken. But, he hesitated, lowering his voice to a whisper. I saw Johann's immigration papers when he arrived in Milwaukee. They listed Hamburg as his home. The truth hit them both at once. Johann Kellerman had lied, and somehow, Violet Müller had spoken his hidden sin out loud. A body in the river. 2 weeks later, Johann's body was found floating in the icy Milwaukee River. The police said he had been drinking, slipped on the riverbank, struck his head, and drowned in the shallow water. A tragic accident, nothing more. At the funeral, Father O'Brien delivered a glowing eulogy. He spoke of Johann's generosity, his devotion to the church, his gifts of bread for the orphans. The community mourned him as an exemplary man. But at the back of the church stood Violet, her pale blue eyes fixed on the coffin. And when the service ended, she approached Mrs. Zimmerman again. "He confessed 3 times about the fire," Violet whispered. "Always on Friday evenings. He said he was sorry for the children, but that they were going to tell about the stolen money. Father O'Brien gave him 20 Hail Marys each time." Mrs. Zimmerman felt her blood run cold. "Violet, how do you know this?" But the girl had already turned away, slipping back to her parents, leaving Mrs. Zimmerman trembling on the church steps. Secrets that should have died. The days after Kellerman's funeral were filled not with peace, but with whispers. The baker's death was strange enough. But what unsettled the German community even more was Violet's impossible knowledge, details she should never have known. Mrs. Zimmerman couldn't shake the memory of Violet's words. Kellerman had confessed 3 times. Always on Fridays. 20 Hail Marys each time. And she remembered something else. Kellerman had indeed confessed every Friday evening. His routine was precise. Arrive at St. Michael's at 7. Kneel in the left chamber of the confessional. 20 minutes later, emerge and pray at the altar. How could a 12-year-old girl know such exact details, unless she had been there? A quiet investigation. Mrs. Zimmerman's fear grew into determination. She began watching. She attended the church more often, noting who went into the confessional, on what days, and how long they stayed. Slowly, she pieced together a troubling truth. Violet's little alcove behind the priest's chair gave her access not just to translations, but to everything. She heard the sins. She heard the penances. She knew who came on what days. And she remembered it all. Violet Müller had become a living archive of the community's darkest secrets. The pattern of death. As Mrs. Zimmerman dug deeper, another pattern began to emerge, one far more chilling than anything she had imagined. Over the past 4 months, 3 other men who regularly confessed on Friday evenings had died. Klaus Brenner, a brewery worker, crushed by a falling barrel in January. Otto Steinberg, a carpenter, who fell from a church roof in December. Heinrich Vollmer, a tavern keeper, who collapsed from a heart attack during a card game in November. All 3 were relatively young. None had known health issues. All were Friday evening confessors, just like Johann Kellerman. And all were dead. The shadow over the ward. By spring of 1871, the Third Ward was no longer just a bustling immigrant neighborhood. It was a place of whispers, shadows, and dread. People lowered their voices when Violet walked past. Mothers pulled their children close. Men in taverns muttered about accidents, about drownings and collapses, about confessions that never should have been repeated. And at the heart of it all stood Violet Müller, small, pale, silent, carrying in her memory a library of sins no child should ever bear. She had become, whether she meant or not, the most dangerous child in Milwaukee. Fire to be continued. Johann Kellerman's death was only the beginning. Violet's knowledge of secret sins was about to place her in the center of something darker, something deadly. Right finger don't miss part 3, where Violet's gift turns into a curse, and the church itself begins to fear the child it once trusted. That's part 2, rewritten for maximum suspense and clarity, about 1050 words. Part 3, The Girl Who Remembered Everything. Clapperboard hook. By the spring of 1871, Milwaukee's German community was whispering about a child who knew too much. A child who could look at a house, a tavern, or even a person's face, and suddenly speak aloud the darkest sins ever confessed in the shadows of St. Michael's Church. Her name was Violet Müller. And every word she spoke made her more dangerous to the living, and closer to the dead. The Tavern Revelation. On a damp March evening, Mrs. Zimmerman walked past Heinrich Vollmer's old tavern. The windows were boarded, the building abandoned after Heinrich's sudden death. There, under the weak glow of a street lamp, stood Violet. The girl's pale blue eyes stared at the darkened windows, her lips moving as if in prayer. But what came out was no prayer. He kept children locked in the basement, Violet whispered, as though speaking to herself. For 3 years, he kept them there, and sold them to men who hurt them. He confessed every Friday because he couldn't stop. The money was too good. Mrs. Zimmerman froze. Vollmer. A man she had greeted in church. A man who'd bought drinks for her husband. A man who had died suddenly of a heart attack. Now Violet was describing crimes so monstrous they made her stomach twist. Violet, she asked softly, how do you know these things? The girl turned her gaze on her, eyes empty of fear. I remember everything, Mrs. Zimmerman. Every word, every name, every sin. The weight of memory. Violet's voice was calm, almost casual, as she went on. I remember Klaus Brenner. He pushed workers into a vat of boiling beer when they caught him stealing. I remember Otto Steinberg. He killed his own brother in Germany, just to steal his inheritance. And I remember Johann Kellerman. He set fire to a house full of children. Mrs. Zimmerman felt faint. These were not the ramblings of a child. These were precise details, names, crimes, motives, things no 12-year-old could know. But, Violet, Mrs. Zimmerman whispered, those are confessions. They're supposed to be secret. They are secret, Violet replied firmly. I never try to tell them. But sometimes the words just come out. When I see a place, or a person, it's like the memories are stronger than me. And with that, the girl walked away, leaving Mrs. Zimmerman trembling on the dark street. A growing danger. Mrs. Zimmerman understood the truth now. Violet wasn't malicious. She wasn't trying to betray the confessional. The poor child simply couldn't contain it all. Her memory was like a dam holding back a flood of sins. And the cracks were widening. Every new word put Violet in danger. Because these weren't petty lies or stolen coins. These were crimes worth killing to protect. And some men, she realized, already had killed. The decline of confession. By April, the pattern was clear. Men who once confessed every Friday at St. Michael's had stopped coming. Some avoided the church altogether. Others changed their schedules, slipping in on Saturday mornings when Violet wasn't there. Fear was spreading. The community had begun to realize their secrets were no longer safe, not even in God's house. Father Patrick O'Brien noticed the change immediately. Friday confessions once filled the church with 15 or 20 voices. Now, barely 5 souls came, each one nervous, each one hurried. At first, he thought grief was to blame. 4 men had died in as many months, accidents and sudden illness striking like lightning. But as the silence of Friday nights stretched on, Father O'Brien began to suspect a darker truth. Wilhelm speaks. The confirmation came one Tuesday afternoon. Wilhelm Zimmerman appeared at the church, pale and uneasy. He asked to speak in private. Inside the sacristy, his heavy accent trembled with urgency. Father, he said, I must tell you about Violet Müller. Father O'Brien bristled. What about her? Has she made errors in translation? Wilhelm shook his head. No, Father, that is the problem. She is too perfect. She remembers everything. And now, she is speaking the confessions aloud, without meaning to. Over the next hour, Wilhelm poured out the story, Johann Kellerman's repeated confessions about the fire, Violet's revelations of Vollmer's crimes, and his wife's growing terror at what the girl knew. Then came the final blow. My wife asked me to investigate Vollmer's tavern, Wilhelm confessed. I told his widow I wanted to buy the building. She let me into the basement. He swallowed hard, his voice dropping. Father, there are shackles bolted to the walls. Small ones, for children. There are stains on the floor, and scratches on the beams. Fingernail marks. Father O'Brien felt the blood drain from his face. This was no child's imagination. This was truth. A priest's dilemma. The weight of it crushed him. If Violet's words were accurate about Vollmer, then they might be accurate about all the men whose sins she carried. And if that was true, then the deaths of Kellerman, Brenner, Steinberg, and Vollmer were no accidents. Someone was silencing the guilty, because Violet had exposed them. Father, Wilhelm said, for Violet's safety, and for the parish, she must stop translating confessions. But Father O'Brien hesitated. Without Violet, the German parishioners had no way to confess. Their souls would remain burdened. The entire sacrament would collapse. He felt torn between duty to the church and duty to the child. Testing the memory. That Friday evening, after confessions ended, Father O'Brien asked Violet to remain behind. He led her to a small chamber near the altar, candles flickering against the stone walls. "Violet," he said gently, "I've heard you sometimes speak of the things you hear in the confessional. Do you know why this troubles me?" The girl lowered her eyes. "I don't mean to, Father. The words, they just come out. When I see places, when I see faces. Like Herr Kellerman's bakery, I couldn't stop thinking about the children in Hamburg." Father O'Brien felt cold sweat bead on his forehead. "Tell me, Violet, what exactly did Herr Kellerman confess?" Her eyes lifted, pale and unblinking. "He said he stole from the church collection box. Children saw him. He set fire under the stairs with oil rags, so they couldn't tell. 6 children died in their sleep. He confessed 3 times. He was sorry, but he said poverty made him do terrible things." The priest's stomach churned. The detail was too sharp, too real. This was no child's fancy. "Violet," he whispered, "who else have you told?" "Only Mrs. Zimmerman. But others know. They whisper about him in the taverns. They say he got what he deserved." Father O'Brien's heart sank. Secrets once meant only for God were spreading like wildfire through the streets of Milwaukee. The dam with cracks. "Violet," he pleaded, "can you try not to speak these things? Can you hold them inside?" Her eyes filled with distress. "I try, Father. I really do. But it's like water behind a dam. The cracks keep growing, and the water has to come out." He realized then that Violet wasn't a betrayer. She was a victim, trapped in a mind that remembered too much, carrying sins too heavy for a child's soul. But that knowledge also made her a threat. To every guilty man in the community. And to the church itself. The journals. That night, as he walked Violet home, Father O'Brien made a fateful decision. He would not remove her. He would not protect her by ending her work. Instead, he would document everything she remembered. Week after week, under the pretense of helping her unburden her mind, he wrote down her memories in neat, careful script. 3 leather-bound journals filled quickly with her revelations. Murder, theft, arson, abuse. The sins of an entire immigrant community now lived not only in Violet's memory, but on paper. And those journals would one day burn with fire. Fire to be continued. Violet's memory had become too dangerous to ignore. But the more she spoke, the more powerful, and the more hunted, she became. Right finger don't miss part 4, where the journals fall into the wrong hands, and Violet's gift becomes the spark for bloodshed. This is part 3 rewritten, approximately equals 1050 words, in suspenseful, easy storytelling for a YouTube audience. Part 3 The Girl Who Remembered Everything. Clapperboard hook. By the spring of 1871, Milwaukee's German community was whispering about a child who knew too much. A child who could look at a house, a tavern, or even a person's face, and suddenly speak aloud the darkest sins ever confessed in the shadows of St. Michael's Church. Her name was Violet Müller. And every word she spoke made her more dangerous to the living, and closer to the dead. The Tavern Revelation. On a damp March evening, Mrs. Zimmerman walked past Heinrich Vollmer's old tavern. The windows were boarded, the building abandoned after Heinrich's sudden death. There, under the weak glow of a street lamp, stood Violet. The girl's pale blue eyes stared at the darkened windows, her lips moving as if in prayer. But what came out was no prayer. "He kept children locked in the basement," Violet whispered, as though speaking to herself. "For 3 years, he kept them there, and sold them to men who hurt them. He confessed every Friday because he couldn't stop. The money was too good." Mrs. Zimmerman froze. Vollmer. A man she had greeted in church. A man who'd bought drinks for her husband. A man who had died suddenly of a heart attack. Now Violet was describing crimes so monstrous they made her stomach twist. "Violet," she asked softly, "how do you know these things?" The girl turned her gaze on her, eyes empty of fear. I remember everything, Mrs. Zimmerman. Every word, every name, every sin, dash dash dash. The weight of memory. Violet's voice was calm, almost casual, as she went on. I remember Klaus Brenner. He pushed workers into a vat of boiling beer when they caught him stealing. I remember Otto Steinberg. He killed his own brother in Germany, just to steal his inheritance. And I remember Johann Kellerman. He set fire to a house full of children. Mrs. Zimmerman felt faint. These were not the ramblings of a child. These were precise details, names, crimes, motives, things no 12-year-old could know. But, Violet, Mrs. Zimmerman whispered, those are confessions. They're supposed to be secret. They are secret, Violet replied firmly. I never try to tell them. But sometimes the words just come out. When I see a place, or a person, it's like the memories are stronger than me. And with that, the girl walked away, leaving Mrs. Zimmerman trembling on the dark street. Dash dash dash. A growing danger. Mrs. Zimmerman understood the truth now. Violet wasn't malicious. She wasn't trying to betray the confessional. The poor child simply couldn't contain it all. Her memory was like a dam holding back a flood of sins. And the cracks were widening. Every new word put Violet in danger. Because these weren't petty lies or stolen coins. These were crimes worth killing to protect. And some men, she realized, already had killed. Dash dash dash. The decline of confession. By April, the pattern was clear. Men who once confessed every Friday at St. Michael's had stopped coming. Some avoided the church altogether. Others changed their schedules, slipping in on Saturday mornings when Violet wasn't there. Fear was spreading. The community had begun to realize their secrets were no longer safe, not even in God's house. Father Patrick O'Brien noticed the change immediately. Friday confessions once filled the church with 15 or 20 voices. Now, barely 5 souls came, each one nervous, each one hurried. At first, he thought grief was to blame. 4 men had died in as many months, accidents and sudden illness striking like lightning. But as the silence of Friday nights stretched on, Father O'Brien began to suspect a darker truth. Dash dash dash. Wilhelm speaks. The confirmation came one Tuesday afternoon. Wilhelm Zimmerman appeared at the church, pale and uneasy. He asked to speak in private. Inside the sacristy, his heavy accent trembled with urgency. Father, he said, I must tell you about Violet Müller. Father O'Brien bristled. What about her? Has she made errors in translation? Wilhelm shook his head. No, Father, that is the problem. She is too perfect. She remembers everything. And now, she is speaking the confessions aloud, without meaning to. Over the next hour, Wilhelm poured out the story, Johann Kellerman's repeated confessions about the fire, Violet's revelations of Vollmer's crimes, and his wife's growing terror at what the girl knew. Then came the final blow. My wife asked me to investigate Vollmer's tavern, Wilhelm confessed. I told his widow I wanted to buy the building. She led me into the basement. He swallowed hard, his voice dropping. Father, there are shackles bolted to the walls. Small ones, for children. There are stains on the floor, and scratches on the beams. Fingernail marks. Father O'Brien felt the blood drain from his face. This was no child's imagination. This was truth. Dash dash dash. A priest's dilemma. The weight of it crushed him. If Violet's words were accurate about Vollmer, then they might be accurate about all the men whose sins she carried. And if that was true, then the deaths of Kellerman, Brenner, Steinberg, and Vollmer were no accidents. Someone was silencing the guilty, because Violet had exposed them. Father, Wilhelm said, for Violet's safety, and for the parish, she must stop translating confessions. But Father O'Brien hesitated. Without Violet, the German parishioners had no way to confess. Their souls would remain burdened. The entire sacrament would collapse. He felt torn between duty to the church and duty to the child. Dash dash dash. Testing the memory. That Friday evening, after confessions ended, Father O'Brien asked Violet to remain behind. He led her to a small chamber. Near the altar, candles flickering against the stone walls. Violet, he said gently, I've heard you sometimes speak of the things you hear in the confessional. Do you know why this troubles me? The girl lowered her eyes. I don't mean to, Father. The words, they just come out. When I see places, when I see faces. Like Herr Kellerman's bakery. I couldn't stop thinking about the children in Hamburg. Father O'Brien felt cold sweat bead on his forehead. Tell me, Violet, what exactly did Herr Kellerman confess? Her eyes lifted, pale and unblinking. He said he stole from the church collection box. Children saw him. He set fire under the stairs with oil rags, so they couldn't tell. 6 children died in their sleep. He confessed 3 times. He was sorry, but he said poverty made him do terrible things. The priest's stomach churned. The detail was too sharp, too real. This was no child's fancy. Violet, he whispered, who else have you told? Only Mrs. Zimmerman. But others know. They whisper about him in the taverns. They say he got what he deserved. Father O'Brien's heart sank. Secrets once meant only for God were spreading like wildfire through the streets of Milwaukee. The dam with cracks. Violet, he pleaded, can you try not to speak these things? Can you hold them inside? Her eyes filled with distress. I try, Father, I really do, but it's like water behind a dam. The cracks keep growing, and the water has to come out. He realized then that Violet wasn't a betrayer. She was a victim, trapped in a mind that remembered too much, carrying sins too heavy for a child's soul. But that knowledge also made her a threat. To every guilty man in the community. And to the church itself. The journals. That night, as he walked Violet home, Father O'Brien made a fateful decision. He would not remove her. He would not protect her by ending her work. Instead, he would document everything she remembered. Week after week, under the pretense of helping her unburden her mind, he wrote down her memories in neat, careful script. 3 leather-bound journals filled quickly with her revelations. Murder, theft, arson, abuse. The sins of an entire immigrant community now lived not only in Violet's memory, but on paper. And those journals would one day burn with fire. Fire to be continued. Violet's memory had become too dangerous to ignore. But the more she spoke, the more powerful, and the more hunted, she became. Right finger don't miss part 4, where the journals fall into the wrong hands, and Violet's gift becomes the spark for Bloods. Part 4, the girl who knew too much. The spring of 1865 brought a strange quiet over Milwaukee's 3rd Ward. To outsiders, life seemed to go on as usual. Children played in the muddy streets, women haggled for bread and sausage at the open-air stalls, and German men gathered in taverns after long hours of work at the docks, breweries, and tanneries. But beneath the surface, unease spread like a sickness. Everyone whispered about the deaths. 4 men gone in less than 5 months. Each death explained away as accident, each funeral well attended, but no one could shake the suspicion that something darker was happening. And at the center of every whisper was a name no one dared speak too loudly, Violet Müller. Mrs. Brunhilde Zimmerman could not sleep. She lay awake night after night, her husband Wilhelm snoring softly beside her, while her mind returned again and again to Violet's pale blue eyes and her dreadful words. I remember everything, every sin. It was not simply that the child seemed to repeat confessions, she repeated them with such detail, such precision, that it felt impossible she was inventing them. Oil rags under the staircase in Hamburg. Children shackled. In Vollmer's basement. Scratches on the wall, blood on the stones. These were not the fantasies of a 12-year-old girl. They were memories. And if Violet remembered everything she had heard in that confessional booth, then the parish was sitting on a mountain of buried crimes ready to erupt. The more Brunhilde thought about it, the more frightened she became for Violet herself. 4 men had died after their sins came too close to light. And Violet was the one carrying the lantern into the shadows. One evening, unable to contain her worry, Brunhilde visited Father O'Brien at the rectory. The priest looked tired, older than his years, his face hollowed by sleepless nights. He invited her in, but when she explained her fears about Violet, he grew uneasy. Mrs. Zimmerman, he said softly, I beg you, Do not speak too freely of this matter. Violet does not mean harm. She struggles with a condition of memory. But if others begin to believe she cannot be trusted, there may be those who act against her. Brunhilde lowered her voice. Father, men are already dead. My husband found shackles in Valmer's cellar. This is not imagination. Someone in this community will see Violet as a danger. Someone will decide the girl must be silenced. For a long time, Father O'Brien said nothing. His hands trembled slightly as he folded them on the table. Finally, he whispered, "That is why I write it all down." Brunhilde frowned. "What do you mean?" The priest rose, crossed the room, and opened a drawer in his desk. He pulled out a leather-bound journal, thick with pages already filled in neat handwriting. "Every word Violet remembers, I record here. If something should happen to her, or to me, the truth will not be buried with us." Brunhilde stared at the book, horror prickling her skin. "Father, if someone discovers you are keeping such a record, they will kill you too." He closed the journal and slid it back into the drawer. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed fear. "Perhaps. But since this great cannot remain hidden forever, God will not allow it. That same week, the fifth death occurred. The body of Matthias Kruger, a cooper who made barrels for the breweries, was found floating near the harbor docks. His skull was split, as though struck with a blunt instrument, but the police insisted he had fallen while drunk and struck his head on a piling. At his funeral, Violet stood in her usual quiet place at the back of St. Michael's. She said nothing during the service, but as the coffin was lowered into the ground, Brunhilde heard her whisper, almost to herself, "He confessed that he drowned a man in the Elbe River in 1859, his own cousin, for the inheritance money." Brunhilde's heart seized. Another crime, another death, and another secret spilling from the lips of the girl who could not stop herself. By April's end, fear spread openly through the Third Ward. Fewer and fewer men came to confession on Fridays. Tavern talk turned darker. Some muttered that God was punishing the community, striking down sinners one by one. Others said the devil walked among them, wearing the face of a child. One night, Wilhelm Zimmermann returned home from the tavern with grim news. "They are talking about Violet," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "Some men think she is a witch, Brunhilde. They say she curses those who cross her path." Brunhilde paled. "And you, do you believe them?" Wilhelm shook his head, but his eyes were troubled. "No, but belief is not required for violence. If enough men convince themselves she is dangerous, they will act. And Father O'Brien may not be able to protect her." Meanwhile, Violet's memory continued to unravel. She began speaking more often in the streets, sometimes to people, sometimes to no one at all. Once, Brunhilde found her standing by the river, staring at the black water. "They sink fast in cold water," Violet murmured, her breath fogging in the air. "The body stiffens. They cannot fight. He told me he watched the bubbles rise until there were no more." Brunhilde shuddered. "Violet, child, you must not say such things out loud. People will think you are cursed." The girl turned those unsettling blue eyes on her. "But it is true. If I do not speak it, it burns inside me. I feel like I will catch fire from all the sins I carry." That spring, Milwaukee's German community began to fracture. Some families withdrew from St. Michael's altogether, attending English-speaking churches across the river where Violet was not present. Others clung to the parish but eyed Violet with suspicion and dread. A rumor spread that one of the dead men had been seen walking near the docks at night, pale and dripping with water. Another whisper claimed that Violet's eyes glowed in the dark, like a cat's, when she repeated sins. The truth was darker still. Father O'Brien's journals were filling with evidence of crimes so vile they could never be reported to police without breaking the seal of confession. Dozens of names, dozens of sins, and a child who remembered them all. The breaking point came in May, when a mob gathered outside the Müller family home. Stones were thrown, curses shouted. Someone painted the word Hexa, witch, on the door in dripping tar. Violet's mother wept, her father begged for mercy, and the family cowered inside while the crowd roared. Only Father O'Brien's intervention, standing in the street in his cassock and demanding obedience to God's law, dispersed the mob that night. But everyone knew it was only a matter of time. As Brunhilde watched the frightened family through her window across the street, she whispered a prayer. Lord, protect this child who knows too much. For if the men do not kill her, the weight of their sins surely will. End of part 4. Right finger, do you want me to continue with part 5, where the mob's suspicions grow darker and Violet's revelations take a horrifying new turn? Part 5, The Night of the Mob. Milwaukee's Third Ward never slept easily after dark, but on one particular May night in 1865, the streets seemed alive with something more dangerous than drunken laughter or the clatter of wagon wheels. Fear had gathered into a living thing, and it prowled from tavern to tavern, whispering Violet Müller's name. The girl with the pale blue eyes. The child who remembered every sin. The one who carried the devil's whispers in her head. By midnight, fear had transformed into fury. Brunhilde Zimmermann awoke to the sound of breaking glass. She hurried to the window of her small brick house and saw lanterns moving through the street. Men were shouting, angry, slurred words carried on the wind. And then she heard the cry that froze her blood. Which child? Her heart pounded. They were headed for the Müller home. The house stood only 2 doors down from the Zimmermanns. Brunhilde threw on her shawl and rushed into the night despite Wilhelm calling after her. By the time she reached the street, a crowd of nearly 30 men had gathered outside the small wooden house. They carried sticks, clubs, and even tools from their work, hammers, chains, iron bars. The windows of the Müller home glowed faintly with candlelight inside. Behind the glass, Brunhilde saw the terrified faces of Violet's parents. The door shuddered under a heavy kick. Bring her out, someone shouted. She curses this parish. 5 men dead because of her. A stone crashed against the siding. Another shattered the front window, spraying glass inside. The crowd roared. Stop this at once. The voice carried strong and steady, and for a moment the mob froze. Father Patrick O'Brien stood in the middle of the street, his black cassock whipping in the wind. He held no weapon, only a small wooden crucifix lifted high. You will not harm this child, he said, his Irish accent sharp with anger. Do you think God will forgive violence against the innocent? Innocent, a voice sneered from the crowd. She speaks the sins of men she cannot know. She sees into our secrets. That is no child, it is the devil's work. A murmur of agreement rolled through the men. Father O'Brien raised his hand. She is no witch, he said firmly. She is a vessel burdened with memory beyond her years. It is a gift and a curse, but not of Satan. If you spill her blood, you will damn your souls. For a long, breathless moment, silence held the street. Brunhilde prayed the mob would disperse as it had before. But then a voice from the back broke the quiet. 5 men are dead. How many more before we are safe? The mob surged again, fury reignited. The front door of the Müller house cracked under another heavy blow. Violet's mother screamed inside. Without thinking, Brunhilde pushed through the crowd and placed herself in front of the door. Shame on you, she cried, her voice trembling but loud. You call yourselves Christian men? Beating down the house of a poor family. Threatening a child. Some hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. Others snarled back at her. She's bewitched you too, Frau Zimmermann. One man spat. We'll cleanse this parish of her curse, with or without your priest's blessing. A man swung his hammer toward the door, but before it struck, Father O'Brien stepped forward and grasped the iron head with his bare hand. The crowd gasped as blood welled from his palm, but the priest did not let go. If you enter this house, he said through clenched teeth, you will have to strike me down first. The moment stretched long and tense. Then, slowly, the hammer dropped to the ground. The men muttered, some cursing, some ashamed. One by one, lanterns lowered. The mob began to scatter into the night, grumbling but defeated. Brunhilde sagged in relief. Violet's parents opened the door, pale and shaking. Violet herself stood in the shadows, silent, her pale blue eyes fixed on the departing men. She looked neither frightened nor grateful, only weary, as though carrying a weight no child should bear. But the danger had not passed. The next morning, Father O'Brien called Brunhilde and Wilhelm to the rectory. His wounded hand was wrapped in linen, but his expression was grim. "They will be back," he said. "I held them off last night, but fear is stronger than faith for some men. They will not rest while Violet walks freely." Wilhelm frowned. "Then send her away. Send her family to another city, Chicago, perhaps." The priest shook his head. "It would not matter. Secrets cannot be outrun. Wherever Violet goes, she carries them with her. And those who fear exposure will follow." Brunhilde whispered, "Then what can be done?" Father O'Brien hesitated before answering. His voice was low, heavy. "I have begun writing everything Violet remembers into journals. 3 volumes already. If the worst happens, the truth will remain. But until then, we must protect her. For the good of her soul, and for the good of this parish." Yet Violet herself seemed beyond protection. In the days that followed, she grew stranger. She wandered alone through the alleys, murmuring confessions aloud as if speaking to ghosts. Brunhilde once found her standing outside Kruger's cooper shop, staring at the stacked barrels. "He drowned his cousin in the Elbe," Violet whispered. The water closed over him like a lid. The bubbles rose, then stopped. He said he felt the man's last struggles through his own hands. "Violet, hush," Brunhilde begged. "Someone will hear you." The girl only blinked slowly, as if she hadn't heard. One evening, as the sun dipped red over the harbor, Violet came to the Zimmermans' door. Her voice was calm, but her words chilled Brunhilde's heart. "More men will die soon," Violet said. "They know I remember. And when I speak, they hear their sins coming back to them. They will kill again. Not just each other, maybe me too." Brunhilde knelt and grasped the girl's hands. "Child, you mustn't think that way. You are only 12 years old." But Violet only looked at her with those unsettling pale eyes and said, "I am 12, but I have lived the sins of 100 men. No child can carry that long." By June, the German community of the Third Ward was divided. Some whispered that Violet was cursed and must be destroyed. Others whispered something worse, that she was not cursed at all, but chosen by God to reveal hidden sins. And as whispers spread, so did fear. Fear that the next death would not be an accident. Fear that the next secret Violet spoke might be yours. End of part 5. Do you want me to continue with part 6, where Violet's strange gift begins to spread panic not only in the German community but in the wider city of Milwaukee, leading to an even darker revelation? Part 6: The Whispering Walls of St. Michael's. By the summer of 1871, Milwaukee's Third Ward had become a place of whispers. The cobblestone streets, once filled with the cheerful noise of German songs and children's laughter, now carried a different sound: fear. People lowered their voices in taverns, avoided eye contact in markets, and crossed themselves when passing the Church of St. Michael, because within its walnut confessional booth sat a girl who remembered every sin. Her name was Violet Müller. And more, people began to believe she was not simply a girl at all. It started with the walls. On warm evenings, when the confessional sessions ran late, parishioners swore they heard voices long after the booth had been closed. Faint whispers in German, fragments of prayers, cries of children, gasps of drowning men. Some claimed it was only echoes, the wood-carrying sound. But others said it was Violet's memory, spilling into the very stones of the church. A brewer's wife fainted after hearing her dead husband's voice call her name inside the chapel. A carpenter refused to enter the sanctuary after he swore he heard scratching, like fingernails, from inside the walls. Soon, women began dragging their husbands away from confession. "They say the child doesn't forget," one muttered. "She keeps the sins alive. Even the walls are listening now." Father Patrick O'Brien tried to calm the growing hysteria. From the pulpit, he thundered that Violet Müller was a faithful servant of God, not an instrument of the devil. But his sermons only seemed to feed the rumors. If he defended her so fiercely, perhaps he too was bewitched. Perhaps he, too, feared that the girl knew his sins. The more the priest insisted on her innocence, the more people doubted him. Meanwhile, Violet herself grew stranger. She rarely played with other children anymore. Instead, she wandered through the alleys of the Third Ward, trailing her fingers along brick walls, murmuring to herself. People who passed too close swore she whispered their names, along with things she could not possibly know. A dockworker claimed she recited the name of the girl he had left behind in Hamburg, and how he had stolen her dowry before fleeing to America. A laundress said Violet told her, in perfect detail, about a baby she had given away years earlier, a child no one in Milwaukee could have known existed. Devil's tongue, the laundress spat, crossing herself. No child should know such things. But Violet was not a witch. She was something far more terrifying. Her memory had become a kind of prison, one she could not escape. Every whispered sin, every hidden crime, every bloody deed confessed in that booth was alive inside her. Sometimes it came out in a flood, other times in fragments. And once spoken, her words spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Men grew paranoid. Who would she speak of next? Which dark secret would roll off her tongue without warning? The fear thickened, until the very air of the Third Ward seemed heavy with it. One July evening, Brunhilde Zimmermann found Violet sitting on the church steps after Vespers. The girl's face was pale, her braids loose, her hands trembling. "They don't want me here anymore," Violet whispered. Brunhilde knelt beside her. "Who, child?" "The men. The ones with heavy sins. They look at me like they're deciding something. Like I'm not a person, but a knife pointed at their throats." Brunhilde's stomach tightened. She had seen the looks too. Dark, calculating, desperate. Violet leaned closer. "I think they will kill me, Frau Zimmermann. And when they do, I think this church will burn." Her words chilled Brunhilde to the bone. That same week, Father O'Brien's journals, those 3 leather volumes filled with Violet's memories, were stolen from his locked study. He never spoke publicly of the theft, but Brunhilde saw the priest's face when he discovered the empty drawer. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. If those journals fell into the wrong hands, every crime confessed at St. Michael's could be exposed. Every hidden sin, every bloody secret, laid bare for the world. The German community would tear itself apart. The first sign of violence came on a sweltering August night. The Müller family's window was smashed again, but this time a bottle of burning oil was hurled inside. Flames licked at the curtains before Heinrich Müller beat them down with his bare hands. Violet screamed as neighbors rushed with buckets of water. The fire was contained, but the message was clear. Someone wanted Violet silenced, permanently. The very next day, her father stormed into the rectory, demanding answers. "You said she would be safe." Heinrich shouted at Father O'Brien. "You said God would protect her." O'Brien stood pale and weary. "I said I would protect her. But I am only a man." Heinrich slammed his fist against the desk. "Then we must leave Milwaukee. Tonight." But Greta Müller shook her head. "We have no money, Heinrich. No place to go. If we flee, we will starve." And so they stayed. By late August, fear had spread beyond the German community. Irish laborers who worked the docks began whispering about the witch child of Cherry Street. Polish immigrants in the next ward repeated tales of confessions turned into curses. Even wealthy Yankees uptown began avoiding bread from German bakeries, muttering that sin clung to the loaves. Milwaukee was becoming infected by Violet's reputation. And then came the dream. Father O'Brien confessed to Brunhilde one evening, after too much whiskey, that Violet had visited him with a vision. She said she saw the church burning, he muttered, staring into his glass. Not in this world, but in her dreams. The roof collapsing, the spires falling, screams all around. And in the smoke, she said she saw faces. The men who confessed to murder. The children they harmed, all of them, rising from the fire like ghosts. Brunhilde shivered. "And what do you think it means, Father?" The priest looked up, eyes hollow. "It means our sins will not stay buried forever. Whether by God's hand or man's, they will rise." In early September, another death shook the Third Ward. A butcher named Matthias Kruger was found hanging in his slaughterhouse, the word mortar, murderer, scrawled on the wall in his own blood. No one could explain how Violet knew the truth, but she had told Brunhilde weeks earlier that Kruger once confessed to cutting down a neighbor in Hamburg with the same knife he used on pigs. The whispers grew into something darker. Not only were Violet's words spreading secrets, now they were marking men for death. She doesn't just remember, someone whispered in the tavern. She calls judgment. By now, it no longer mattered whether Violet Müller was witch, prophet, or cursed child. To the people of Milwaukee, she had become something worse than all three, an omen. And omens, people believed, could only end in fire. End of part 6. Would you like me to continue with part 7, where the community finally begins plotting openly to destroy Violet, and St. Michael's itself becomes the center of horror? Part 7: The Gathering Shadows. The autumn winds swept through Milwaukee's 3rd Ward in 1871, carrying with them the smell of damp earth, coal smoke, and something darker, fear. Everywhere, whispers about Violet Müller grew sharper, uglier, more dangerous. By now, nearly every man and woman in the neighborhood had heard one of her uncanny revelations. A dockworker accused of cheating on his wife. A seamstress confronted for stealing cloth. A tavern owner whose violent temper was suddenly no longer secret. And always, Violet spoke the truth. That was the part people feared the most. She was never wrong. To some, she was a prophet. To most, she was a curse. On a cool October night, a secret meeting took place in the back room of Kruger's butcher shop. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. It was in that same shop where Matthias Kruger had been found hanging, blood smeared on the wall. The men gathered around a single lantern, their faces half lit, half shadow. Wilhelm Zimmermann was there, though his wife Brunhilde would never forgive him for it. So were Heinrich Vollmer's cousins, Otto Steinberg's brother, and a dozen other men whose lives had been touched by Violet's words. A heavy silence hung until Karl Brenner, Klaus's older brother, spoke first. She is no child. She is the devil's tongue. As long as she breathes, none of us are safe. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. But she is 12, Wilhelm whispered. What would people say if she simply vanished? They would thank us, Karl growled. She is poison. She shames men, ruins families. Look what happened to Kruger. Look how many good men are dead since she came into that booth. Someone spat on the floor. Another slammed his fist on the table. The fear in the room had hardened into anger, and anger was quickly turning to resolve. It was decided. Violet Müller had to be silenced. The plan was simple, too simple. On All Hallows' Eve, when spirits were believed to walk the earth, they would lure Violet into the church alone. The girl often lingered after evening prayers, humming to herself, touching the walls as though they whispered back. That night, she would not leave. The butcher's hooks in Kruger's abandoned shop were still strong. And once the deed was done, the river would carry away what was left. But plans made in shadow have a way of leaking into the light. Brunhilde Zimmermann overheard her husband muttering in his sleep. The name, Violet, slipped from his lips, followed by words like, fire, meeting, and silence. Fear clenched her heart. The next morning, she cornered him in the kitchen. Wilhelm, she said sharply, what are you planning? He turned pale, refusing to meet her eyes. For God's sake, Brunhilde, don't ask me. It's better if you don't know. She seized his arm. She is a child. If you touch her, there will be no salvation for any of us. He wrenched free, voice breaking. And if we do nothing, she will destroy us all. That night, Wilhelm slept in silence. But Brunhilde did not. Meanwhile, Violet herself seemed to sense what was coming. She grew quiet, withdrawn. No more strange pronouncements, no sudden bursts of other people's secrets. Instead, she spent hours staring at the church walls, fingertips tracing the carved wood, as though memorizing them. One evening, Brunhilde found her sitting on the steps again, pale blue eyes shining with an eerie calm. They've decided, Violet said softly. Brunhilde froze. Who has decided? The men. They whisper in cellars and shops. They carry their fear like knives. They want me gone. Tears pricked Brunhilde's eyes. Child, How do you know this? Violet looked up, and for a moment, Brunhilde swore those eyes were not the eyes of a girl at all. They were older, endless. I hear their confessions even when they are not in the booth. They think their sins are hidden, but they follow them like shadows. I see the shadows, Frau Zimmermann. I always see them. All Hallows Eve arrived with a cold rain. Fog rolled off the river, wrapping the third ward in a grey shroud. Inside street, Michael's, Father O'Brien lit candles for the evening mass. Attendance was thin, people feared the holiday, fearing spirits more than saints. But Violet was there, kneeling alone at the altar rail, her small frame trembling in the candlelight. Brunhilde could not bear it. She crossed the aisle, knelt beside the girl, and whispered, "Go home, Violet. Do not linger here tonight." Violet shook her head slowly. "It will not matter. They are coming." At that very moment, the church doors creaked open. A group of men entered, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Their eyes did not go to the altar, or the priest, or the cross. They fixed only on Violet. Father O'Brien stepped forward, blocking their path. "What business have you here?" Karl Brenner sneered. "Our business is with the child." "Step aside, Father." The priest's face went white, but he did not move. "You will not harm her. Not in God's house." One of the men raised a fist. "Then you will fall with her." The storm outside grew louder, rain hammering the stained glass windows. The flickering candles cast long shadows across the walls, and in those shadows, something stirred. The men advanced, and Violet rose slowly to her feet. She did not cry. She did not scream. Instead, she spoke in a voice that carried like a tolling bell. "You confessed. Every one of you. You told me your sins. You begged for mercy, but mercy is not mine to give." The men faltered, fear flickering across their faces. "The children you burned," Violet said, her eyes locking on Karl Brenner. "The neighbor you struck down," she whispered to Wilhelm Zimmermann. "The woman you drowned in Hamburg," she said to another. One by one, she named them. One by one, their sins filled the air like smoke. The church walls groaned, the candle flames bent as if blown by an invisible breath. And then, faint but unmistakable, the voices of children filled the sanctuary. Crying, laughing, calling for their mothers. The men staggered back, terror in their eyes. "It's the walls," someone gasped. "The walls remember." Brunhilde clutched Violet's hand, trembling. Father O'Brien raised his crucifix high, chanting prayers through shaking lips. The men fled. Boots clattered on the stone steps, disappearing into the storm. But as the doors slammed shut behind them, Violet swayed, her strength spent. She collapsed into Brunhilde's arms, whispering, "It's not over. Fire is coming." The priest bent close. "What fire, child?" Violet's lips moved, barely audible, "The fire that cleanses." And then she fainted, her body limp, her face pale as the dead. That night, the men who fled swore they heard footsteps behind them wherever they went. Some claimed they saw children's faces in the rain-soaked windows. Others said they dreamed of fire devouring Milwaukee, flames leaping from roof to roof, screams rising to heaven. And in every dream, Violet Müller was standing in the fire, untouched, her pale blue eyes shining like embers. End of part 7. Do you want me to keep building toward the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, tying Violet's prophecy of fire into real history for Part 8? That would make the horror even more chilling and historically grounded. Part 8: The Fire That Cleanses. The night after All Hallows Eve, the men who tried to silence Violet Müller could not sleep. Some drank themselves senseless, others prayed until their throats were raw. But none escaped the feeling that something had followed them home. Whispers in the dark. The sound of tiny fingernails scratching on their doors. The smell of smoke where no fire burned. They were haunted, not by Violet, but by their own confessions. A community afraid. In Milwaukee's Third Ward, people began avoiding Violet in the streets. Mothers pulled their children away when she walked by. Shopkeepers stopped serving her family. Yet no one dared confront her directly. They remembered the church that night, the way the air had grown heavy, the way voices not of this world had filled the sanctuary. She called the dead, one man muttered. No, another corrected, the dead called her. Meanwhile, Father O'Brien grew pale and thin, carrying his crucifix everywhere, whispering prayers under his breath. He told Brunhilde Zimmermann in secret. The girl is no witch. She is a vessel. These sins do not stay buried. They demand light. But Brunhilde, watching Violet waste away from exhaustion, wondered if the vessel could survive much longer. The prophecy of fire. One evening, as the leaves turned brittle and brown, Violet sat by the river with Brunhilde. She traced patterns in the mud with her finger, eyes unfocused. It's close now, she murmured. What is close, child? Brunhilde asked. The fire. It's coming like a beast with 100 mouths. I hear it roaring already. Brunhilde shivered. You mean the men who want to harm you? Violet shook her head. Not men. The city. The fire will eat the city. The dead children want it. They say only fire will wash the sins away. Her words chilled Brunhilde to the bone. And within days, news arrived from the south. Chicago was burning. The Great Chicago Fire, 1871. On October 8, flames erupted in Chicago. Whether it began in a barn or from sparks in the wind, no one could say. But the fire grew wild, leaping from house to house, block to block. By morning, half the city was engulfed. By the next day, nothing could stop it. Churches, taverns, homes, warehouses, all devoured. People ran screaming through the streets as the sky glowed red. Refugees fled north by train and boat, arriving in Milwaukee wide-eyed and ash-covered. And when they spoke of what they had seen, the screaming, the walls collapsing, the smell of burning flesh, Violet only nodded. I told you, she whispered. The fire that cleanses. Panic in the Third Ward. The German community of Milwaukee panicked. Some believed Violet had cursed Chicago. Others believed she had foreseen God's punishment and that Milwaukee would be next. Karl Brenner gathered men again in Kruger's empty butcher shop. This time, there was no debate. Do you not see? He shouted. She brings fire. She called down judgment on Chicago. If we do not end her, Milwaukee will burn too. But Wilhelm Zimmermann, who had once agreed, now shook his head. His wife's pleas had worn him down. She is just a girl, Wilhelm said. Maybe cursed, maybe blessed, but killing her will not stop fire. It will only damn us further. The room erupted in argument, fists slamming tables, curses flying. But outside, in the foggy alley, a pair of pale blue eyes watched silently. Violet had been listening all along. Father O'Brien's dilemma. Father O'Brien could no longer sleep. His journals were full, 3 leather-bound volumes of Violet's memories of confessions. Every page contained names, crimes, sins, and details too specific to ignore. If he kept the journals, they might one day expose every guilty man in the Third Ward. If he destroyed them, he might be erasing justice for the innocent. And all the while, Violet grew weaker. Her skin was pale, her hair limp, her eyes ringed with shadow. Father, she whispered one night, you must not save me. You must save them. Them, he asked. The city. The fire is still hungry. Her words chilled him more than the cold wind outside. The night of the omen. On October 11th, just 3 days after the Chicago fire began, Milwaukee had its own scare. A warehouse near the docks caught fire. Bells clanged, men shouted, and smoke rolled across the ward. People screamed that Violet had cursed them. She called the flames here. They cried. Though firefighters managed to stop the blaze, fear spread faster than fire ever could. By dawn, crowds gathered outside St. Michael's Church, shouting for Violet Müller to be turned out. Women clutched their rosaries, men carried clubs. Send her away. She is the devil's child. She will burn us all. Father O'Brien stood on the church steps, holding the crucifix high. Silence, he thundered. She is under my protection. If you strike her, you strike the church itself. But his voice trembled. Even he was no longer certain. Violet's vision. That evening, Brunhilde found Violet sitting in the darkened church, staring at the flickering candles. They will come for me, Violet said. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. They believe killing me will stop the fire. Brunhilde wept. And will it? Violet smiled faintly. No, the fire is already here. Not in the wood and stone, but in their hearts. It will eat them from within. She reached out and took Brunhilde's hand. Her skin was icy cold. When I am gone, remember this, the walls will speak. They will not be silent. The growing divide. The third ward split in two. Some, mostly women and children, pitied Violet, believing she was chosen by God, burdened with the sins of men. Others, mostly the men who had the most to hide, saw her as a mortal threat. Taverns buzzed with talk of mobs, of accidents, waiting to happen. Rumors spread of men sharpening knives, of barrels of pitch hidden near the church. And through it all, Violet grew thinner, as if the weight of hundreds of secrets was crushing the life out of her. A city on edge. By the end of October, Chicago lay in ashes, and Milwaukee lived in dread. Every wisp of smoke from a chimney made people flinch. Every spark from a forge made them cross themselves. And every time Violet Müller walked the streets, people whispered and scattered. She was no longer just a girl. She had become a symbol. A curse. A prophecy. And everyone knew symbols could not be allowed to live. As winter crept closer, the men of the Third Ward prepared once more. They would not meet in butcher shops or taverns this time. No lanterns, no arguments. Only action, and Violet, pale and silent, seemed to be waiting for them. End of part 8. Would you like me to make part 9 the direct moment of Violet's capture and the horrifying attempt to end her life, blending mob violence with supernatural revenge, before the grand finale in part 10? Part 9 The Night the Mob Came. By late November of 1871, Milwaukee's Third Ward was no longer the same community it had once been. The bakery windows were shuttered early. Taverns emptied before midnight. People avoided St. Michael's unless it was Sunday morning. And everywhere Violet Müller went, she carried silence like a storm cloud. Neighbors crossed streets to avoid her. Children stared but dared not speak. Even the wind seemed to hush when she passed. The men whispered in taverns. She must be stopped. If we wait, we'll burn like Chicago. Better one girl than a whole city. The mob was forming, even before they admitted it to themselves. Father O'Brien's warning. Father O'Brien knew what was coming. He had seen it before in Ireland, fear boiling into violence, neighbors turning on neighbors, mobs moving like animals in the night. He begged the men of the ward to show restraint. He stood in taverns with his crucifix raised, preaching that Violet was not a witch, but a burdened child carrying sins not her own. But his words fell flat. Men who had once confessed their darkest secrets through Violet now saw her as a threat more dangerous than the law itself. As long as she lived, their pasts were not safe. One evening, O'Brien visited the Zimmermans. His hands shook as he drank the beer Brunhilde offered him. Keep your doors locked, he warned. They are sharpening their knives. They speak of fire, not confession. Brunhilde's face drained of color. Fire. Yes, O'Brien whispered. They want to cleanse her with fire. Violet's calm. The strangest part was Violet herself. She knew. She always knew. The week before the mob gathered, she told Brunhilde. They will come for me. But it won't end as they think. Her pale blue eyes held no fear, only exhaustion. The dead children are waiting. The walls are waiting. The fire is already lit. Brunhilde tried to hush her, but the girl only smiled faintly. Do not be afraid for me. Be afraid for them. The mob gathers. It was the first Sunday of Advent when the mob finally formed. They gathered in Kruger's old butcher shop, the same place where the first whispers against Violet had begun. Lanterns swung on hooks, shadows trembling on the blood-stained walls. Karl Brenner stood at the front, face red with drink. We have waited too long, he growled. Every day she lives, more secrets spill out. Every day the city draws closer to fire. Tonight we end it. Men murmured agreement. Some crossed themselves. Others gripped axes, ropes, and jugs of kerosene. There was no vote this time. No hesitation. They left the butcher shop as one, boots crunching on the frozen cobblestones, their lanterns bobbing like angry stars. Dash dash dash. The knock on the door. Brunhilde heard them before she saw them. The murmur of voices, the tramp of boots, the crack of wood as someone tested a club against a fence. She rushed to Violet's small bedchamber. The girl was already sitting up, fully dressed, her hands folded in her lap. "They're here," Violet said calmly. Brunhilde's throat closed. "We must hide you." "No," Violet interrupted. "There is no hiding, only fire." The pounding came then, heavy fists on the Zimmerman's front door. Wilhelm stood frozen, pale as chalk. "Open up," a voice roared. "Bring out the girl." Brunhilde clutched Violet's hand, tears streaming down her face. But Violet only squeezed gently, as if to comfort her. "It's all right," the girl whispered. "You will see." Dash dash dash. Dragged into the street, the door splintered under a boot. Men poured inside, the smell of drink and kerosene thick in the air. They seized Violet roughly, though she did not resist. Brunhilde screamed, clawing at their arms, until Wilhelm pulled her back. "Don't fight them," Violet told her softly, her voice steady even as rough hands bound her wrists. "It has to happen." The mob dragged her into the street, where neighbors had gathered, lanterns glowing against the frost. Women clutched shawls around their shoulders, children peeked from behind skirts. Karl Brenner lifted his lantern high. "This girl has cursed our parish, cursed our city. Tonight we end her spell." The crowd roared approval, though some faces turned away, ashamed. Dash dash dash. The pile of wood. They dragged Violet to an open square near the river. There, a crude pyre of broken barrels and scrap wood had already been prepared. Kerosene splashed across the pile, soaking into the planks, filling the air with sharp fumes. They tied Violet to a post in the center. Her pale hair gleamed in the lantern light. Brunhilde pushed forward, screaming. "She is a child, a child." Father O'Brien forced his way through the crowd as well, his cassock whipping in the wind. "Stop this madness. You bring damnation on yourselves." But the mob would not be stopped. Dash dash dash. Violet speaks. As the torches drew close, Violet lifted her head. Her voice carried, clear and calm, over the noise of the crowd. "You think this will silence me. But the fire is not for me. It is for you." The mob hesitated. The torches trembled. "You built it," Violet said, her pale eyes glowing in the firelight. "Every sin, every lie, every child's cry you ignored. You built this fire. I am only the match." A silence fell, heavy and unnatural. Even the river seemed to still. Then someone shouted, "Burn her." And the torches dropped. Dash dash dash. The fire awakens. Flames leapt hungrily across the pyre. The wood crackled, kerosene roared, smoke curled black into the night sky. People cheered, others prayed, some wept. Brunhilde fainted against Wilhelm's chest. Father O'Brien fell to his knees, clutching his crucifix. But Violet did not scream. She did not writhe. She lifted her head, eyes blazing brighter than the fire itself, and began to speak, not in her voice, but in a chorus of voices. Children's voices. Hundreds of them, crying out from the flames. "They burned us in Hamburg. They chained us in cellars. They drowned us in vats. They stole our lives, and no one spoke." The crowd staggered back, horrified. The flames writhed like living things, curling into shapes, small hands, faces, eyes staring from the fire. The mob's courage broke. Men dropped their clubs and ran. Women shrieked. Children wailed. And through it all, Violet's thin figure stood untouched by flame, her bonds burning away while her skin remained pale and perfect. Dash dash dash. The collapse. Then, with a sound like thunder, the pyre collapsed inward. The flames surged high, and Violet vanished in the inferno. The crowd scattered in terror, convinced they had witnessed not a death but a judgment. When the fire finally burned itself out, nothing remained at the stake. No body, no bones, only ashes, scattered by the wind. Dash dash dash. Aftermath. By dawn, the Third Ward was silent. No one spoke of what had happened. No one confessed. No one dared. Father O'Brien shut himself in the rectory, refusing visitors. He burned his journals in the church stove, tears streaming down his face. Brunhilde wandered the streets in grief, calling Violet's name, though she knew the girl would never return. And Wilhelm, once a man of reason, whispered to anyone who would listen. The fire is not finished. It only waits. End of part 9. Would you like me to make part 10 the chilling conclusion, where Milwaukee itself faces a supernatural reckoning, tying Violet's fate to the community's destruction? Part 10 The Ashes of the Third Ward. The night Violet Müller vanished in the fire of her own execution was not the end. It was only the beginning. By dawn, the ashes of the pyre had already scattered across Milwaukee's Third Ward. The wind carried them into tavern doorways, down cobblestone alleys, even across the frozen river. Wherever the ash landed, whispers followed. Children heard voices in their sleep. Women woke to the smell of burning wood. Men swore they saw small handprints in the frost on their windows. The mob that had gathered the night before tried to return to their lives. But the fire would not let them go. The first house. It began with Karl Brenner, the man who had shouted the loudest for Violet's death. On the second night after the burning, his neighbors saw strange light flickering inside his home. They assumed it was a lantern or the hearth. But by morning, the house was nothing but blackened beams. Brenner's body was never found. Whispers spread through the ward. The fire took him. Father O'Brien's despair. Father O'Brien no longer stood at the pulpit. He wandered the church by candlelight, muttering prayers in Latin, his eyes hollow. He told Brunhilde in secret, "It follows them, one by one. What they set upon her now sets upon them. Fire clings to guilt." Brunhilde shook her head, her face drawn with grief. "Then none of us are safe." O'Brien looked at her, tears in his tired eyes. "No, child, none of us." The winter of fire. The winter of 1871 was cruel. Snow fell heavy, but even snow could not hide the flames that appeared again and again in the Third Ward. A warehouse ignited in the night, though no lamp had been burning. 2 men were found charred to cinders inside, their mouths open as if they had been screaming long before the fire reached them. Weeks later, a boarding house erupted in flames, trapping 6 families. The survivors swore they had heard children laughing in the smoke. The city grew terrified. People whispered of a curse. They said Violet had not died at the stake but had melted into the fire, becoming one with it. Now she walked the ward not as flesh but as flame, hunting those who had betrayed her. Brunhilde's vision. One night, Brunhilde dreamed of Violet. The girl stood in the snow outside her window, her pale hair unburned, her eyes cold blue fire. Behind her, dozens of children's shadows flickered, their mouths moving in silence. Brunhilde pressed her hands against the glass and whispered, "Why do you return?" Violet's voice was soft but sharp. "I never left." Neither did they. When Brunhilde woke, she found ash scattered across her windowsill, though no fire had burned nearby. The Great Fire of 1892. For 20 years, the Third Ward lived under the shadow of Violet's curse. Families moved away, churches filled with terrified prayers. But still the fires came, sparing no one for long. And then, in 1892, the fire returned in full. On a hot August night, a blaze erupted in the Third Ward unlike any before. Flames roared through warehouses and homes, leaping from roof to roof faster than men could run. Witnesses swore the fire moved like a living thing, circling blocks, cornering families, cutting off every escape. One sailor claimed he saw a pale girl walking calmly in the inferno, her dress untouched by flames, while children's voices echoed in the smoke. The fire consumed nearly the entire ward. More than 400 buildings were reduced to ash. Thousands were left homeless. Some called it an accident. Others knew better. They said it was Violet Müller's final vengeance, the fire she had promised the night they tied her to the pyre. What remained? After the Great Fire, the city rebuilt the Third Ward with brick and steel, as if stone could resist memory. The new buildings rose taller, sturdier, cleaner. But the ground beneath them was black with history. Old families whispered to their children, "Don't walk alone at night. Don't follow voices in the smoke. And never, ever speak her name out loud." Some nights, when fog rolls over the river and lanterns flicker in the alleys, people still claim to see her, a pale figure with ash in her hair, her eyes reflecting flame. And if you listen closely, you might hear it too, the faint laughter of children, carried on the wind. Epilogue. Brunhilde lived long enough to see the ward rebuilt. But she never forgot. She told her grandchildren stories of a girl with pale hair and a heart too heavy with other people's sins. Remember, she whispered, the fire isn't gone. It only sleeps. Father O'Brien died alone, his crucifix clutched tight in his hand. On his wall, carved into the wood above his bed, were 3 words no one could explain. She still burns. The legend. Today, historians write about the Great Fire of 1892 as a disaster of negligence, a lantern tipped over, a warehouse too dry, a wind too strong. But in the taverns and old corners of Milwaukee, the story is told differently. They speak of Violet Müller, the girl who carried the confessions of sinners until their sins turned to fire. They say she was not destroyed by the flames. She became them. And they warn that if you walk the streets of the Third Ward after midnight, when the air smells faintly of smoke, you might see her watching. Waiting. Fire. End of the historic horror series Fire. Movie camera call to action for YouTube. If this story chilled your spine and made you feel the weight of forgotten history. Right finger, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Right finger, like this video to support more stories like this. Right finger and share and comment your thoughts. Do you believe Violet Müller's spirit still haunts Milwaukee's Third Ward? The fire may sleep, but your voice keeps the legend alive.